Hi, everyone. Welcome to Module 7 of the Excellence Modules, Universal Design for Learning and Distance Learning, Creating Access for All. I'm happy to be here with you today. My name is Amy Ruhak, and I am an Educational Specialist in the Exceptional Support Branch.
And hi, I'm also excited to be here. I'm Jen Martinson. I'm the English Learner Professional Development Specialist.
Thank you, Jen. I'd like to thank also the teacher leaders who are joining us on this webinar. I appreciate your leadership in supporting your colleagues and improving outcomes for all of our students in the state. And then, of course, I'd like to thank all of the classroom teachers who are now participating in this module. I really appreciate your dedication and resilience during these trying times in education, and I hope that you find something useful in this module that will support you. Before we get started, I wanted to just clarify that this webinar is only one part of this module. What is covered in this webinar is actually going to culminate into the introduction to a website called School Virtually, where you can continue to explore UDL and its applications for distance learning instruction. And it will provide you with ongoing implementation guidance as you strive to really incorporate UDL into your distance learning. Additionally, there will be a resource toolkit that will have other examples, strategies, and voices from our teacher leaders in the field. So keep that all in mind as we go through this webinar. This is only the beginning and an overview to hopefully improve outcomes and your distance instruction for students, especially with English learners and students with IEPs. So before we get started, I start all of my webinars with these reminders. So before we even begin to start talking about UDL, just some distance learning reminders. Number one, good instruction is the foundation of all learning. So even though we are now providing instruction in a different environment, it doesn't mean that we have to start from scratch. You are all effective teachers. You all know that good pedagogy consists of providing explicit objectives, modeling, guided practice, formative feedback, all of those things we take with us into this distance learning environment. With that being said, we want to focus on the pedagogy, not the technology. We are so fortunate to have so many wonderful tech tools to support our instruction, but we don't want the tech tools to become a barrier to learning. Really, what we need to do is identify what we want to do with our students, what we want to accomplish, and then select the appropriate tool to support those goals. We also need to remember, especially for our students who are English learners or students with IEPs, we need to provide systematic, intentional instruction to promote new learning. So that means staying focused on the standards and on the IEP goal objectives and the language learner objectives, because that is really what will help them to close that achievement gap. As always, keep the structure predictable and simple. So just as in brick and mortar, when you have your routines and procedures, you're going to have the same structure in your online learning environment. So find a few tools that work well for you and use those tools consistently and reliably and predictably so the students are able to focus on the instruction and not the technology. And as Anita Archer said over the summer in a webinar about distance learning, what you think about is what you learn. So if the students are grappling with technology or if they're grappling with your new routine or your new schedule, they're not going to be able to focus on the content, right? So what you think about is what you learn. So those are some key things to keep in mind. Another thing I want to stress is, of course, identifying and prioritizing objectives. So it can be a little bit dizzying now in this era of virtual learning with all the different tech tools, computer-assisted instructional programs being sort of thrust at you to forget that, okay, we're teaching to this standard, this is my lesson objective, and this is how I'm going to accomplish that. And especially for students with IEPs, we want to make sure we're also focusing on their IEP goals and objectives. And for English language learners, we want to think about how does the objective support language acquisition across speaking, reading, listening, and writing. And that goes without saying that you're going to have to address potential barriers. So this student population, our struggling learners, our students who are English learners, students with IEPs, are going to face many barriers to accessing the instruction. And so, of course, we're going to need to address those barriers. And UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is one way that we can do that. Again, make sure you're aligning your instruction to meet your objective. Monitor student acquisition of objectives, provide specific and timely feedback, and then adjust instruction based on student performance. So these are just good tenets of instruction, and we will transfer those over to the online environment and our students will have more effective online instruction. So our learning goals for today.
Hi. So in our session today, we are really just going to come out with understanding the purpose and the benefits of UDL. This is a very wide topic, and so today we're just doing an overview and making connections to distance learning. We also want to posit how UDL can work as a framework in considering the curriculum that you're developing to deliver through distance learning, knowing that we want to make sure that it is accessible to all. So anticipating what barriers our students might have right from the beginning, we are using this proactive design model so that we can ensure that all of our students can engage in the instruction. And finally, we are going to share some specific examples of tools that we have used to design lessons, design instructional supports that will remove those barriers. And to Amy's point about not needing to have many different kinds of tools or strategies, you'll notice that we use the same tools across the different principles because they're the ones that we're comfortable with and we can use well.
So really, what is UDL? And I'm going to acknowledge that everyone has varying degree of understanding of UDL. I know that within the DOE, it's been talked about to varying sort of degrees of competency. And then sometimes students are exposed to it in their university prep program. But I wanted to just give a brief background on what UDL is and why it is important in this time during distance learning. So UDL was originally developed at least 2 decades ago by CAST, which is the Center of Applied Specialized Technology. And the link is here for you to go explore. That'll be also in the resource toolkit. And really what they were doing is they were looking at current neuroscience research and looking at the networks that are involved in the brain while learning is occurring. And they identified 3 separate networks. So the affective, so really like the why of learning. So for students, understanding like, why am I learning this? The recognition, the what of the learning. So that's more on the teacher end. So what content am I providing? What input am I trying to give to these students? And then strategic, the how of learning. So how is this going to happen? What types of behaviors or movements or instructional participation is going to occur with the students in order for the learning to happen. So these are the 3 different networks that have been identified to be involved with learning: the affective, recognition, strategic. And then there's one more key piece that CAST identified, and that is that learner variability is the rule rather than exception. So it's not as if we have a classroom full of 20 kiddos and only 5 of them learn differently. Actually, there's much more variability across all of the students in your classroom. And so we need to approach our instruction when we're planning with that in mind. So given all of those points, the 3 core principles of UDL were designed to support the 3 different learning networks while also simultaneously looking to address learner variability. Because if we're addressing learner variability, then we're going to eliminate barriers to instruction and create access. So the 3 principles, which some of you probably are very familiar with: multiple means of engagement, that supports the affective network, the why; the multiple means of representation, which supports the recognition network, so the what; and then the multiple means of action and expression, which supports the strategic network, so the how. So when you walk away from today's presentation, these are the 3 main principles I want you to remember. And also when you're planning for your instruction, how can I provide options for engagement? How can I provide options for representing my content? And how can I provide options for students to provide what they know through their action and expression?
So if you are relatively new to learning about UDL, as I recently was, when you open up the UDL guidelines and checkpoints, you'll notice that everything is sorted under these 3 principles that Amy just went through, and making sure that we are providing choice and flexibility and helping our students to engage. When you open up and look at there are 9 additional guidelines, and then beneath those are 31 checkpoints. So Task has provided this handout in a variety of ways. So you actually have a choice. If you prefer to start with just focusing on the 3 principles, there is a file for you to download. If you really like to see this whole picture, then you can take the one that is here. And you'll notice that there are numbers after each one of the checkpoints. And for me, that was a really big aha, because when I first started reading about UDL and language learners, I didn't know what the numbers meant. So it was good to learn how I could connect back to the prior knowledge that I had. So just when you start to explore the website, consider what resource is most useful for you and how it connects to the work that you're already doing.
Right. And to add to that, I wanted to also stress that this can seem very overwhelming, right? And no, by no means are you supposed to be trying to incorporate every single one of these in every single lesson. I was taking a course with Dr. Kavita Rao, and she said, you know, you should select one of these principles and one of the guidelines and implement that in one of your lessons, and that's a great start. So don't feel as if this is a mandate that you have to do all of these things. And I think that that is something that's challenging about UDL, is that sometimes all of this can be a barrier to teachers starting to implement it. So if anything, just come back to these 3 main ideas of providing multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. And as we go through, we'll give you specific examples for each one of these guidelines. That's what these bolded words are here, the guidelines. But just remember they all fall under engagement, representation, action, and expression. Okay. So now we're going to go through our final sort of description of UDL and just remind everyone that it's a framework. So it's a framework for the design of accessible materials and instructional methods. So UDL is not a curriculum, and you know UDL, honestly, to distinguish it from differentiated instruction, you know, UDL is something that you do proactively. So UDL principles guide the design of learning experiences to proactively address learner variability. So before I even deliver the lesson, I'm considering ways that I can invite all students to have access and full participation in the lesson based on their variability. And this is obviously very important for students who are English learners and students with IEPs. Oftentimes with differentiation, what happens is there's a set curriculum, and then there's a few students that struggle, and then the teacher has to go back and adapt that curriculum. But with UDL, the idea is that we're considering variability from the beginning, so everyone will have access from the get-go. And what we want to do is intentionally incorporate technology to support all of the learners in your class. And really, I think that this resource, and the reason why this topic is so critical at this juncture, is because UDL provides guidance for teachers in developing effective online and hybrid instruction. And I say that because I know teachers are constantly being overloaded with tech tools and new ideas for interacting with their students remotely. But if we return back to the principles of effective instruction and the 3 principles of UDL, which is options for engagement, representation, action, and expression, it will help you as you're planning to organize your thoughts and your strategies and your lessons.
And those of you who do have background knowledge on this, it's likely that it was presented in the context of special education. But this framework really lends itself well to thinking about the variability of your English learners. Our English learners learn best when they are in content classes that have the appropriate scaffold so that they can start to learn the language that they need for social studies, for math, for ELA. So they have dedicated ESL, ELD, but they rely on all of us to help them to learn the English that they need to be successful. So while we may not know everything about every single one of our ELs, we do know that we can plan for the systematic. We know that we can plan for systematic and predictable barriers based on what we know about English learners in general. So that's why it's important to know the terms that are there. We have students with limited or interrupted formal education, consider what kinds of barriers to accessing your curriculum students who don't know expectations, for example, or their families may not know about the expectations of learning in a distance environment. They may not have had a lot of exposure to formal writing, the writing process. So knowing that up front, we can think about what our objectives are and how we can make sure that they can reach those same objectives. We know newcomers have not only the language barrier, but oftentimes the culture barrier. And we want to think about how we can make sure that we have an inclusive environment where they start to feel comfortable, feel like they're part of our community. And another term that you have been hearing a lot about is LTELs. These are our long-term language learners. That's defined by a language learner who has taken the access or the WIDA designed test for language proficiency that they are mandated to take every single year. If a student has taken that access 5 times or more, they're considered a long-term language learner, and they have some specific needs that we want to address up front. So as Amy said, we can kind of proactively plan for removing those barriers. So there's also a direct line to what we know about connecting to our EL's family culture, what they bring, how they best learn, and empowering them to feel they have a voice as well in the classroom. So some things to know about language acquisition. Again, that's not one of our objectives today, but some good background knowledge when you're thinking about predictable variability with English learners is this. Very typically, most likely, listening and speaking skills develop faster than our reading and writing skills. And receptive language skills, which are listening and reading, right, getting that information in, tend to develop faster than speaking and writing, our productive language skills. So keep that in mind when you are designing your curriculum and thinking about what are some of the challenges that English learners in your class might face as a result of this information.
So now let's take a closer look. Thank you, Jen, for providing that background. Let's take a closer look now at some strategies that we can implement using different tech tools to support students according to the 3 different principles of UDL. So multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. So we're going to go ahead and get started with providing multiple means of engagement. So if you recall back to our introductory slides, we talked about the affective networks of learning, so the why of learning. And I know that all of you as instructors know that engaging your students are so important. So we really want to focus on how can we provide an engaging environment for our students in a remote learning environment, whether that be strictly online or also hybrid. So here's the guideline that goes underneath this provide multiple means of engagement. So there's 3 separate guidelines. Here's guideline number 1. So providing options for recruiting interest. So everyone, all good teachers know that at the beginning of your lesson, you need to have a hook, you need to have a way to get the students motivated to want to learn that topic. So how can we do that, especially in remote learning environments when students might be learning asynchronously, or you don't have a lot of time with them synchronously each week. So one of the things that you can do is you can incorporate hyperdocs into your instruction. So I want to clarify that hyperdocs are interactive instructional Google Docs or slide decks. So hyperdocs are not simply a Google Doc with a list of links. Hyperdocs are created intentionally to engage the student and allow them to explore a topic and also practice, have some guided practice and get some feedback. So some things about hyperdocs is that they can provide students with multiple means to engage with content. So when we're talking about engagement, we're also talking about using multiple media, right? So hyperdocs can do that. They can replace static worksheets and textbooks. They can be much more engaging than working through a Wordly-wise book. Not that I have anything against Wordly-wise, but you know, you understand the difference between a workbook and a hyperdoc where you're having the opportunity to look at different pictures, to look at charts, to collaborate with a student, a peer on a Google Doc, to watch a video. It can supplement synchronous and asynchronous instruction, and it can create a sense of student autonomy, right? Because they're working on this alone, yet there's a lot of guidance built into the actual HyperDoc. So the HyperDoc concept was originally developed around a 5E instructional model, although as instructors, you don't have to use the 5E instructional model. You can use your own design of instruction. But the 5E instructional model begins with this really critical piece of engage. So I'm just going to show you for a matter of time one HyperDoc. This is a simple HyperDoc lesson, but reminding you that in our resource toolkit, there will be how-to tutorials for creating HyperDocs and all of the links that you could ever want to explore HyperDocs. So in this example, there's a lesson, I'm sharing a lesson about the design process. So the design process, and this was created by elementary school teachers. So the design process is a process that elementary and middle school and even high school students learn in different contexts. This is an elementary example. It ends with an egg drop, right? How can you help an egg land safely? That's just the end sort of project. It's not a fun project, but the purpose is for them to learn about the design process and all the different components of it. And you can see that they have the very first thing is the engage. So click here. So if I'm a student at home, I'm going to click here to learn more about the design process. And I'm going to play the first 20 seconds.
Do you think you could open this door? Of course you could. But what if you were way over here, lying on your bed? Becky T. of Valparaiso, Indiana sent us this engineering challenge. Make something you can use to open your door while lying on your bed.
Mike and I will be one design team. Kara and Ma will be the other.
Okay, so you can see how, and then it goes into how they come up with the design process. And as you go through the HyperDoc, you see there's more videos about the design process. There's a graphic that shows the steps of the design process. So really creating that hook and then also providing the students with multiple media to build their background knowledge about this topic. So HyperDocs can be a great way to really provide options for engagement. The next guideline that we're going to look at is providing options for sustaining effort and persistence. And in these examples, we're going to show you how you can use Jamboard to address that second bullet there about varying demands and resources to really fit the level and the need of the students you're working with. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and Jen will talk you through this.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. One of the benefits that we have in distance learning, if we provide our students with these types of resources, such as a HyperDoc, such as using Jamboards, is that it allows them the opportunity to view videos as many times as they want, to read as many times as they want, to use translation tools, and then feel prepared when they come to the class discussion. So this is an example of a Jamboard that was designed to support a breakout room. So they're looking for similarities and differences between these two animals. So this might be the appropriate Jamboard for one group, but we might know that another group could use additional support. So we can supply them with pre-made sticky notes that they can then drag and drop into the appropriate place. And there may even be a different level of support that you'd want to provide. It's okay. So you can provide additional levels of support based on what you know about their language acquisition. What level are they at? So everyone has access to their students, their English learners' access scores in the LDS system. So you can find out, and it will be printed for you or presented to you on the can-do descriptor format. So you can have a good idea of what you can expect from a language learner and how you can support them with gaining more language so that they can move up. So you can almost think a little bit like a rubric, right? We're always trying to level them up to the next level. So this type of strategy is appropriate for elementary, middle, or high school. We're going to look at another example of a strategy. I think it's here. So this is an example of how you want to keep it simple, right? We want to have very clear directions, and we want to keep our objective in mind. So if your objective is that students are going to be able to learn about the parts of a neuron by comparing and contrasting two different diagrams, then think about when we think ahead, what could be the barrier if we make them search the internet for the images, then they may get stuck in that and they'll never get to the important work that's actually aligned to your objective. So in this case, we pulled the images for them and we provided another level of support by offering them a graphic organizer. We are not mandating that they use the graphic organizer because maybe it's not helpful to them. This is called a top hat graphic organizer. So it's a variation of a compare contrast like the Venn. Top hats can be very good for some students who have anxiety about that little space, because sometimes if you have them draw their own, right, there's not enough space to put the things they have in common. This offers them a slightly different format. And at the bottom, we've even built in a paragraph frame so that they know how to present that information. Because again, our goal is not that they write a paragraph. Our goal was that they learn about the structure of a neuron through this whole process. So building in this support will help them to feel like this is a task that's worth my time because I probably can be successful with it.
Thank you, Jen. The next guideline we're going to talk about for multiple means of engagement is providing options for self-regulation. And this is something that is a particular challenge for all of our students now that they're learning at home, right? There's many more distractions. The interface can be itself a barrier. So how can students with IEPs who already have IEP objectives, goals and objectives based on, sustained attention, self-regulation. How can they be successful? So one of the things that we can do is we can create self-monitoring checklists in Google Forms and check in, check out self-monitoring checklists. These are all evidence-based practices that we use for our students when we're in person, but we can also create really simple forms for them to do when they're at home. So for instance, here's a morning check-in. It says, "Good morning, Erin. Wouldn't you want to start school today with this rooster?" And here are some of the students' goals. So the purpose of this is to develop self-regulation though, right? So the student is filling this in based on what we've identified are the student's needs. So I was in my seat at 8 o'clock. Yes or no? I had all of my supplies. Yes or no? I began to work within 1 minute of teacher direction. I participated in a chat box 2 times during the morning session, and I volunteered to speak at least 2 times during the morning session. Now, this is something that is highly individualized, right? So this is for Erin, based on what Erin needs. But when the beauty of using Google Forms and the beauty of using tech tools and UDL is that when you're planning ahead of time proactively, you can align these supports to the specific student needs. So that's just one example of a check-in. And it's good to have, based on the student, for Aaron, he would have a morning check-in and then he would have an afternoon check-in, right? Because to go the whole day would be too long. We need to chunk that self-regulation and chunk that self-monitoring. So that's an example of that. And then I also wanted to remind you, and I'm sure that teachers are doing amazing things with this, but along with the self-monitoring checklist, providing the reinforcers and what types of reinforcers can you provide for students as they are being successful in working towards their goals. And one of those things that you can do is think about, traditional reinforcers that you used in the classroom, but of course you're going to have to think of some other ideas. So you could use virtual stickers. You can make virtual stickers using your Bitmoji or Google Draw. One reinforcer that my daughter's teacher uses is allowing students who achieve their own personal goal to choose the morning music that plays when the kids log on to class. Another reinforcer could be allowing a student to share a talent or skill. Another one is simply, the classroom jobs. Every student, not every student, a lot of students are motivated to take on those roles in person, right? So maybe the student gets to take attendance. And what we know about behavior supports is that the reinforcer has to be meaningful for the child, right? So if one reinforcer is not working for a student, then you need to identify what reinforcer will. And then you also need to identify when saturation occurs, like when the virtual stickers are no longer effective, you might need to select another reinforcer. And this is especially for students, who struggle with executive function challenges and with some behavioral challenges. Okay, so now we are actually switching gears and going into multiple means of representation. So we're leaving engagement and we're entering representation. And if you remember from the introduction, representation really gets at the what of learning. And there is so much of the what of learning. This is all of the input that the students are getting. So this could be what is provided in the textbook. This could be what the teachers are sharing via videos. This could be what they're looking at in terms of pictures and graphs. This includes what the teacher is saying. So even the teacher talk, everything that the teacher is putting out there in this environment of learning is the what. So the purpose of, really acknowledging multiple means of representation is to be sure that we address the needs of all of our students and provide them with ample opportunity to understand our representation of the content. So for this example, we're going to look at providing options for language and symbols. Specifically, we can look at support decoding of text, math notation, and symbols. And right here, we can show, I'm sure the math teachers are all over this, and I know that Stepping Stones has a lot of virtual manipulatives. In the resource toolkit, there's a whole bank of virtual manipulatives. So here's just an example of a virtual manipulative with number frames that you can use when you're instructing your students for them. So you can, what you would traditionally be doing in the classroom, you could do for them virtually. And you click on here and then you can choose 5, 10, 20, 100, and you can play around with that. One of the important things to note, though, is, of course, with UDL, we want to provide options, right? So, of course, it's important to provide physical number frames because some students would like to have that frame mat at home. So, of course, you'd have to print these out and send them home to the parents, or the parents would have to pick them up. But if they had this, then they could actually just use Cheerios or pennies, or even, the students can draw this themselves. It's just a rectangle. You can direct the students how to draw their own 10 frame mat, but providing them with those choices. And as I said, there's a whole bank of virtual manipulatives in the resource toolkit.
That's great. Thank you. And another thing that we know is a commodity during these distance learning times. Uh-oh.
It's okay.
Okay. In these distance learning times is talk, right? We know that our students are not getting as many opportunities as they used to have to engage with one another, whether socially or academically. So we're trying to build in those opportunities using breakout rooms, or being intentional about calling on each student, checking in with each student. Maybe I'm going to say every student's name at least 2 times during this class. But one thing that we want to be mindful of when we're supporting our English learners is really trying to have intentional teacher talk. So, for example, this the file that I'll make sure is on shareable settings. The teacher was looking at a particular lesson in Wonders. It was a shared reading about coral reefs and the effects of pollution, and a photographer who's working with the Nature Conservancy. And the goal is that the students will be able to identify organizational structures of different sections of the text. So that's a 4th grade standard. And that's what we need to stick to when we're going through our questions. So this teacher says, after this paragraph on page 123, I'm going to stop and I am going to say, in this section, the author wanted us to, shared with us information about coral reefs and the algae that live on them. What we see this word here that was like as a result. So what organizational structure is it that the author's using? That's right, it's cause and effect. How did knowing the term ecosystem help us? Okay, right, because we know that, and then you can even script your answer that you want to hear so that you're able to listen for that. And then the next section, same thing. What did the author want us to learn here? The relationship between pollution and the coral reefs. What words did, and then you can kind of gradually release, right? So what structure is this? That's right, it's cause and effect. What words helped us find that? That's right, the if-then statement. And then the same thing for the last section, which happens to be a sequence section. And you can give the opportunity to say, it's not, we see these different structures. So by scripting out questions and expected answers for those precious synchronous learning time, you really can help the EL student to stay focused on what the objective is. If we kind of go off and start to talk about, oh, this one time that I was at the Nature Conservatory is so cool. There was this display. It was like a volcano, and then like everything was coming out. If I'm trying to follow you and I'm only catching like every few words because of the rate that the input is coming in, I might suddenly be very confused about what I am supposed to attend to while reading the text and listening to my peers answer. So just something to think about during this time of when you're planning ahead for barriers.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. That teacher talk is so important now more than ever. You're right. When we have precious synchronous time with our students, especially. And then do you want to go ahead and address the next guideline, providing options for comprehension?
Yes. So we know that our students are bringing with them various levels of not only language acquisition, but the ability to read with fluency. We know that sometimes even our LTELs are still struggling with decoding when we get into, like, say, 5-syllable words and not knowing what the word parts are. So we really want to think about how we can support our EL students with, well, and obviously I'm focused on EL, but how we can support our EL students with learning the necessary vocabulary to be successful in all of the content areas. So the FRAIR model is something that I'm sure all of the teachers here are familiar with, or the 4-square graphic organizer. And this is an appropriate graphic organizer for some vocabulary words, right? And not all necessarily. So we don't necessarily want to have our students do every single one of the vocabulary words in a unit into a FRAIR model, but ecosystem was a pretty critical term to understand that text. And I know that I can have students explore it. The key to using a graphic organizer like this with English learners is flexibility, which is the name of the game in UDL. How can we be flexible with how our students are remembering the term? So oftentimes we see things on FRAIR models like non-example or antonym. That can be really challenging for an EL learner who is just trying to grasp the meaning of that term. So you might allow students to, they can link translation tools to their slides. They can attach a video that helps them remember what the word is. They can mark down what the part of speech is and make a connection to what they're learning in their dedicated ESL, ELD, and ELA classes. So really think about how we can be intentional with building FRAIR model personal dictionaries and reminding students that that's not that is not the assignment, right? That's not the end of the assignment. The goal of a FRAIR model is to build vocabulary knowledge so that they can apply it into a text. So we want them to be going back to these tools and using them, not handing it in for the week and then moving on. So mentioning things like, why did knowing ecosystem and the work that you did in your FAIR model help you understand this? By modeling those connections, you're reinforcing to students that these are tools that they are building for themselves.
Yeah, and I'd like to add a couple of things. Thanks, Jen. Of course, every time that Jen says this is helpful for ELs, that this is also really helpful for students who are just struggling learners, students with IEPs who have goals and objectives related to reading, writing, speaking, listening. And also, this digital FRAIR model is really powerful tech tool because it allows students to collaborate in real time, right, with the teachers and with their peers. So now we're going to go on to multiple means of representation, the guideline providing options for perception. And so this is something that obviously is really important. And we haven't talked yet about text to speech and speech to text. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Read and Write for Google Chrome, but I would be remiss if I did not really make a plug for this. It is such a useful tool for all students, but especially students who are English learners and students who have IEPs. So I'm going to take the time to make sure, that one's not going to work, that you actually get to watch this.
Google Apps for Education are everywhere. You might well be using them in your own school, along with millions of other students and teachers. Google Apps are great, but what about students who need a little extra help? Working with documents and the web can be a challenge for struggling readers and writers, English language learners, and students with learning disabilities like dyslexia. Now there's an answer to help every student get the most from Google. Take a look. Read and Write for Google Chrome is this friendly toolbar that installs neatly in your Chrome web browser. So it plays nicely with all these classroom devices, PCs, Macs, and Chromebooks too. It's there whenever it's needed, making it easier for students to work with Google Docs and other documents like PDFs or EPUBs. It also works with web pages. Okay, let's see how easy it is to use. Highlight any passage of text and hear it read out loud. You can pick different voices and adjust reading speed to suit any listener. Speech to text accurately transcribes your students' words as they talk. It's ideal for capturing thoughts on the fly, especially for people who find typing tricky. Word prediction helps reluctant writers, offering word suggestions as you type. There's a talking dictionary, picture dictionary, and fact finder that make research faster, easier, and more fun. And there's a translator for other languages, such as French and Spanish. These colored highlighters are really useful for collecting and summarizing key information. Just pick out key points and gather them together in a new document. Why not try Read and Write for Google Chrome today? It's already being used by millions of students worldwide, and you can install it free at the Chrome Web Store.
Okay, so I wanted to share the video with you because I really think it's useful to see in action all of the things that it can do. And this is an example of a digital text tool. Digital text is all around us, right? It's everything. It's the text in the web page, it's the text in your PDF, it's the text on your Google Slides, on your Google Docs. And so really finding a powerful digital text tool that can do these things can really help improve access for your students who are struggling readers, writers, and even, have trouble organizing their ideas. So Read and Write for Google Chrome is something that I highly recommend. The next thing we're going to talk about, and this is sort of the next item is pretty related. It's providing multiple means of action and expression. So really, now how are we going to allow our students to express themselves and engage in the learning process? And the first one that I want to show you, which is optimizing access to tools and assistive technologies, is voice to text with Google Docs. So even if your students don't have Google Chrome on their computers, or you don't have Google Chrome, it's very easy for students to actually go into a Google Doc, and this is my webinar example, and you just simply go to tools and say the students are brainstorming their ideas about writing an essay about the theme of blood on the river. So Blood on the River, it's what they read in most fifth grade classes, and it's my consistent example because my daughter's in fifth grade, so she's reading Blood on the River. So she's required to write an essay, and she's trying to organize her thoughts, and she wants to communicate with her teacher. She doesn't feel like writing it down, so you can simply go to voice typing, and when you turn on the microphone, it'll capture your voice. I think that some of the themes in Blood on the River might be persisting because Samuel was trying really hard. And so you can see, I'm going to turn off my microphone. You can see that, she's just talking out loud and she's capturing her ideas, and she can go back to her ideas and read them, and she can share them with her teacher. And it does a pretty good job of capturing what is being said. So that's available in Read and Write for Chrome, but that's also very simply in the Google Docs. And another thing to think about, though, if you're an English language learner, that Jen will now insert.
So this is a great example of a tool or a strategy that can be really good for some that may not be appropriate for all. So if I am a language learner and I maybe have a thick accent of some kind, I am very apprehensive about making grammatical mistakes. When I'm speaking into the microphone and I'm seeing the words come up and they're not the words that I want to see, and I'm seeing a lot of underlining that's telling me that I'm making mistakes, I may become frustrated and distracted. So it could be appropriate for some, but maybe not all. So another strategy to maybe try is allow students to submit to you voice memos. Students can just use the microphone on their, most devices have a recording, maybe an iPad or a phone, something built into their personal computer that will allow them to just think through a piece of writing to you. So if they say, okay, I'm going to write my argument about that trees are, that forests are really important. And so some of the details I'm going to include are about, the water and the, resources. And then they can save it and, add it to their drive, email, however you set up that process. But this is a great way for you to collect that formative data that you want, whether it is about writing or if it's a check-in, right? This could be an alternative to the form for check-in, right? Maybe some students would prefer to just talk into a microphone and send that file to you. So kind of thinking about, many of us are using tools like Marco Polo. We don't use these tools in our instruction, but the concept behind it we can apply.
Thank you, Jen. So our next guideline for multiple means of action and expression is providing options for expression and communication. And so what we've selected here are just a couple of examples of using multiple tools for construction and composition. And at this point in the presentation, I'd just like to remind you that all of these tools should be selected based on the fact that they're supporting your lesson objective and what it is you want the students to accomplish. So please do not have your students fill out a graphic organizer if it's not supporting the end goal of your lesson. But there are a whole host of fillable graphic organizers available, easily searchable on the web. You can have the students actually type in here, and then you can provide your comments in real time, or if they're working synchronously, they can type in, you can check in, you can add your feedback as they go along, so you don't have to wait until the next class. And like I said, with the number frame, you also have the opportunity to have the students draw them at home if you want to have a physical one. And they exist for all sorts of organizational purposes. And here's a cause and effect chain. And you just click on the box and you can have the students fill in their thoughts. And these are really helpful because we know that we've been using them to support students in organizing their thoughts and in composing their writing in traditional brick and mortar. But now you don't want to recreate the wheel. You don't have to remake all of these organizers. There's a whole host. They're going to be in the resources toolkit of fillable graphic organizers. But again, be sure that you provide the appropriate scaffold. Some students may not need the graphic organizers. Also being very mindful that you need to teach the students how to effectively use the graphic organizer. You don't just pass it out and say good luck, especially for students with IEPs who struggle with organization. You would, of course, sit down and teach them step by step how to use it, and then monitor their use of it and provide them ongoing feedback. And another example that we have included here is scaffolded Jamboards. So this is something that was taken from a Thanksgiving ELA sort of idea. So what are you grateful for? So for instance, some students would only go into, I'm sure you all know about this add image in Jamboard, Google image search, and they could identify pictures. They can communicate with pictures. They could say, I am grateful for my cat, right? And then they select a cat. I selected a black cat because I love black cats, and now we have a gray cat. So that's pretty simple, but you're allowing the student to have a voice. You could also be working with them in simple decodable words as well, if you wanted to use this Jamboard for a different purpose. But what are you grateful for? Here's an example of something with sentence stems. I am grateful for, and the option was soccer. And the correct word spelling of because is because. So I am grateful, and then they can fill in soccer, because, etc. So it's a sentence stem along with a picture. And another one, you can use this as compose a well-written 5-sentence paragraph, including a main idea sentence, 3 detail sentences, and a conclusion sentence. And this might be more appropriate for one of your other students in your class if you're going to do a breakout room or something. So really thinking about providing that the students, if we go back here with the tools for construction and composition, how are you going to support them as they're trying to express what they know? And then actually the last one, which is great. We're doing great on time, so we can show you the school virtually site, which is going to be really exciting. We've made it through this is the ninth guideline of UDL. The last one we're going to look at is provide options for executive functions. And we already talked about self-regulation and the importance of that, especially with distance learning. And now Jen is going to share a resource that you can use to support planning and strategy development.
So we are always trying to think about ways that we can be flexible with giving comprehensible input for all of our students and with setting really clear expectations for the product that we want them to use to show us their learning. But when we tell them sometimes, okay, we're going to write your opinion, just go ahead and, draft out your first draft of an opinion. The students don't really know how to organize that, or the giant Google Doc is very intimidating. What they might benefit from is a Google slide presentation such as this. So we walk them through what the expectations are. And on the first slide, you'll see that we even, on the cover sliding, if you go up there, click on the mentor text, we provide a model. Hopefully this is one that we might have used in our instruction to show students what it might look like when they're done. So they can kind of go back and compare what they're doing. Now, these are real student samples taken from Achieve the Core. You might have samples that are from your own class. And they are, because they're real, they have actual errors in them too. So that's something to be mindful of when presenting that to your ELs, right? If they're attending to that. But that use of imperfect English. So here we walk them through what is an introduction going to look like, and they can chunk that on this slide. And then maybe they're using a self-regulation strategy where if I do this slide, I get to take a break and then come back and we go to the next slide, and it tells them exactly what they're going to do for this section of their writing, including having the words, some of the, we call them the mortar words, right? We have our brick words, which are the things that we want to get across to people. And then how we put those words together can often be a mystery depending on my level of language acquisition. So if we build some of those words in here, and again, you might have different versions of this based on what you know about your students. So we walk them all the way through reasons 2, 3, and then, of course, the conclusion. So for some students, chunking it like this makes it a much more manageable task. And by providing them with explicit instructions about what they need to do, again, we want them to feel like I might be successful at this after all, right? Okay, if this is worth my time and effort, I'm going to be persistent because I kind of want to make my opinion. I want to learn how to share I want to share my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jen. So that was a nice sort of whirlwind tour through the 3 principles of UDL, but hopefully you will have found that some of the tech tools and strategies are something that you could use in your classroom to improve your instruction, especially for students with IEPs and English learners and struggling learners. But now what I want to do before we go and honoring our time, I know we only have a few more minutes, but we want to share this website, School Virtually, which was actually developed by Dr. Kavita Rao, who is one of my former colleagues at UH, and Dr. Carolyn Torres, who is at KCC. And then, so 2 of our local scholar practitioners, and then Sean Smith at University of Kansas. And this site takes all these concepts of UDL and really provides teachers with very simple, direct ways in which they can implement them into their classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and open the site, and I've made a plug for this site many times. One of the cool things about the site is that there is a page for parents and families. This is something that teachers can use to give them ideas about how to communicate with their parents and families, but also they can share it with parents and families as well. If you go to the educators page, I'm just going to point out some key areas to check off where you can start. So as you can see, it has a really nice design. These are leading experts in UDL. But if you go to the technology tools and strategies, I think a great place to start would be technology and universal design for learning. This really provides you with a nice overview of the tech tools that you can use, but how you can use them to create really responsive learning environments in an online environment or hybrid. So they go through delivering instruction online, technology in UDL. Hopefully this looks familiar to you now. And if you click on here, you'll go into the deeper depths of the guidelines and checkpoints. A neat thing is that they have it organized by digital tools for engagement, digital tools for representation, and digital tools for action and expression. And each one has a table like this. It names the digital tool. It says what you can do. So what can the tool do? And then it gives you ideas for using it. And then like we mentioned earlier, it gives those numbers, the UDL connection. So if we go to digital tools for engagement, it'll show you this table. So the tool that you can use, maybe is Google Hangout or Reminds, and what can you do? So it allows phone calls and text messaging, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Ideas for use online, so asynchronous, synchronous, and then those checkpoints. So that is actually a really useful resource to have. So they have digital tools for representation, action and expression, engagement. They also have low tech and no tech approaches to distance learning, which is really important because UDL does not necessarily need technology in order to implement the principles. A recently added resource is UDL-based design and digital tools for online learning. And if you have a moment, I highly suggest watching these videos. They're all put together by Dr. Kavita Rao. They're really short. This one's 4 minutes, 6 seconds. It's just digital tools and online learning, supporting learner variability, an introduction. This one is supporting representation online. So, we spoke about how do we support options for representation. This video is supporting action and expression online. And then this one's supporting engagement online. And lastly, designing online learning experiences. One of the things that I really wanted to share, and I don't know if Jen, you want to speak to this. If you go over to the bigger picture planning online for online learning, there is a section on creating culturally responsive distance and online teaching that is really more relevant for students who are English learners.
Yes, there's really good examples here on how to make home school connections and how to draw families in. And I know that this is a goal for many schools across the state as they look at the needs of their language learners. So I would highly recommend reading through some of these examples and seeing how they align to the plans that are already in place. I think for me with UDL for language learners, when we are casting this net of supports based on the predictability of the variability of our learners, taking into consideration the specific needs of language learners or students with IEPs, we are often putting into place things that are helping far beyond the scope of the people we know who actually need it. So for me, the metaphor for UDL that really clicked was, we have laws that every new building is going to have to be accessible, right? It needs a ramp of some kind so that people can get in. But that ramp is not just used by people who are having trouble walking, right? That ramp is useful for everybody. So by really digging in and figuring out which tools are going to work for you, and I like as well that it's simple, right? These are not extravagant, elaborate lesson plans. This is just like, have your students interview the parents. Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Like I can do that, right? So they're manageable, simple suggestions with very specific examples of what it might look like.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And they also do provide an online learning experience design worksheet to help guide your planning. And this is constantly being updated. For students who have IEPs, they have a section on progress monitoring. So how do you progress monitor and implement IEPs for distance and online learning? So this is really just such a treasure trove. I really like how it's so user-friendly for teachers, and even schools can contact them if they wanted a little bit more in-depth professional learning related to this as well. But I highly suggest that after going through this module that we just presented, or this webinar that we just presented for you, that you go into the School Virtually site. And as I said, following this webinar, we're going to be creating our resources toolkit, and then you can, of course, go to the School Virtually site to look for more ideas and more strategies. And of course, you're always welcome to contact myself, Amy Ruhak, or Jennifer Martinson if you have any questions. And then I'm going to open it up to the chat to see if anyone has anything they wanted to add or had any questions before we bring the webinar to a close. So feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments.
And as people are pulling their thoughts together, Amy, another piece about School Virtually is because Kavita and Carrie live here, teach here, the examples are relevant, right?
Right. Definitely.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. We'll definitely check that out.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, so I just be on the lookout for teachers, be on the lookout for more resources to come, and please utilize the School Virtually site to help guide you. And thank you again for all you do for our students with IEPs, our English learners, and all of our students, right? Because they are all of our students.